And we are rolling. Hey guys, how's it going? It's your buddy Jake Dominguez back with another movie review. Here I am reviewing Cars 3, the brand new Disney Pixar movie. That's right, I was finally able to see this movie and hear my thoughts on that. Now, before I begin this review, let me just say this. The first movie that I ever really fell in love with was Toy Story. Actually, I take that back. It was The Lion King, but it was kind of Toy Story at the same time. I was like one or two, so it was kind of both of them at the same time, but especially Toy Story. I was just so obsessed with that movie when I was a little kid. Like, when I say little kid, I mean literally like 1 to 2 years old. That was my favorite movie. I would watch it over and over again. And Disney Pixar, I gotta say, Pixar in general has been such a huge influence to me as a person, as a filmmaker, and as a film fan in general. Ever since I've grown up with Pixar movies, ever since I was again, literally my entire life. And I can't even put into words how much I respect those early filmmakers like John Lasseter, Pete Docter, Lee Unkrich. I think I'm pronouncing his name right. I think it's Unkrich, I think. Bob Peterson, Pete Docter, all those guys. I have such great respect for them. Pixar are arguably the greatest storytellers in the world. Their filmography speaks for itself. The Toy Story movies, Monsters Inc., A Bug's Life, The Incredibles, Ratatouille, Up, WALL-E, Inside Out, the list goes on. I am such a great admirer of them. Not only did they help me learn to love movies, and some of those films are just my favorite movies of all time, period, they honestly kind of helped make me a better person. I honestly believe that. All their movies have great messages about family and friendship and all that good stuff. I love Pixar. I love them. I'm not the biggest fan of the Cars movies. I really like the first Cars movie just fine. I think it's a good movie. It definitely has that heart and humor that John Lasseter always brings to his films. He was the director of that film. He's also like in charge of Disney's animation program now and of like just everything Disney. He's the man. He's a pretty awesome guy. And it definitely has his heart and all his touches in the first Cars movie. I like that film quite a bit. I think more than most people. But I was disappointed with Cars 2. Cars 2 was Pixar's very first movie that didn't get very good reviews. In fact, it kind of is their only movie to really get panned by critics. And yeah, a lot of audiences were also pretty disappointed in it as well. It just became like this weird spy parody thing, which in a movie, this is a weird random world where cars take over the world and they have spies. I mean, this doesn't make sense. I mean, none of it makes sense, but it just felt kind of weird, kind of random. And to make matters worse, they had Mater be the main character. Lightning McQueen was in the background. It just didn't work. I could do a review of Cars 2 another time, but overall, a lot of people were disappointed by it. Myself included. Although I will say, I don't hate that movie as much as other people do. I just don't think it's especially great, and it's definitely Pixar's weakest movie they've made. So that was then, and all these years later, we are getting Cars 3. The first Cars movie came out like in what, 2006? Oh my gosh, that makes me feel old. Moving on, and here we are, Cars 3, over a decade later, and I really didn't know what to expect. But I do enjoy the first Cars movie. I was looking forward to see this brand new Disney Pixar movie. When Pixar makes a movie, I'm going, no matter what. I'm going to see that movie in the theater, period. And so I went and, well, let's talk about the plot first before I get to my thoughts on Cars 3. Cars 3 tells the story of Lightning McQueen. He's racing just the same as ever as we saw in the last two movies, but he's starting to get kind of discouraged because all these brand new young racers, these cars basically, are kind of coming in on his territory, and he's not really winning as much races and stuff anymore. And a lot of people are telling Lightning McQueen to give up, that he's too old, it's time to step back and retire from racing. There's one particular car who's voiced by Armie Hammer. I think the character's name is Jackson Storm or something like that. And he really is just a huge rival to Lightning McQueen, and he's teasing him and just constantly calling him out and beating him and all this stuff. Lightning McQueen gets really discouraged, and after a really huge accident happens, he has to decide for himself if he's going to stay a race car, continue racing, or if he should really give up. So basically, he goes out to search what, I don't know, his life's true meaning is, and yada yada yada, all that good stuff. You'll have to see the movie to find out more because I don't want to spoil too much. But that's the basic plot of Cars 3. And I gotta say, I gotta hand it to Pixar for handling such a brave story. This is a movie about mortality. It kind of sounds weird to say that, but that's kind of it. Not that they get into all this life of meaning of life and death kind of stuff. I mean, you don't see anyone like literally die in the Cars movie because it's a Cars movie. However, it's a film about old age and how you're not as good as you used to be when you're older and stuff like that. Again, it's kind of like Lightning McQueen's having a midlife crisis in this movie, literally. And that's pretty brave for Pixar to do, especially in a children's film. The Cars movies especially are really aimed more at kids more than the whole family. I mean, there are family movies, but I think like little kids are the main target audience for these movies. I mean, just based on what I've seen. And I gotta say, to make a movie like this about old age and mortality, a Cars movie about that, I give them credit. That takes a lot of guts. And it almost makes me wonder if little kids will even like it. I don't know if kids will enjoy this movie as much as the other Cars movie. Don't get me wrong, I think they will. I think kids will love it. But in terms of the themes of mortality and stuff, I don't know. I'm interested to see what kids' reaction to that will be, if they'll find it boring or whatever. And don't get me wrong, it's still a Cars movie. It's still just cars racing and jokes and all that. It's just, just like the same as the last two. But those themes are in this movie, and I give them credit for that. And overall, if I'm going to be 100% honest, even though that is a pretty brave and gutsy thing to do in this movie, I thought this movie was just okay. And if I'm going to be honest, again, I was kind of disappointed with Cars 3. This is a perfectly fine movie. There's nothing really wrong with it. I can't pinpoint lots of problems and flaws, but it's just very okay. It's kind of just mediocre. When I go to see a Pixar movie, I always go in with high expectations. The highest expectations. Their filmography of just masterpieces speaks for itself. But Cars 3, even though it is pretty brave what they're doing with this plot, the overall story of the movie is just kind of generic. I was honestly kind of bored throughout most of the first act and some of the second half of this film. Well, I mean, like the second act of this film. I was honestly I always found it kind of dull. And that's a problem, because Pixar, again, are the best storytellers on earth. And when they have a story that just isn't that compelling and honestly kind of is making me bored, that's really disappointing. Now, Disney and Pixar released a movie in November, I think it was November of 2015, called The Good Dinosaur. It was their first kind of box office disappointment. A lot of people didn't like it, but I really enjoyed The Good Dinosaur. That movie, one of the biggest problems of it, one of the biggest criticisms of it, is the story and how it was kind of generic and like other things we've seen before. But because I liked the character of Arlo in that movie and everything else and how I cared about the characters and what they were going through, the atmosphere, blah, 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 it didn't bother me as much and I was still able to enjoy the movie. I liked The Good Dinosaur quite a bit. But the problem is that Cars 3, it has a very generic, predictable story. There's nothing in this plot that really surprised me. And it honestly just feels like a bunch of other movies we've seen before. Like, there's a lot of Rocky 3 and Rocky 4 in this movie that they kind of combine. The Rocky movies, I'm a huge fan of those. And there's elements of Rocky 3 and Rocky 4, interestingly enough, that they put into this Cars movie. And some people might like that. If you're like a fan of sports movies and a fan of NASCAR or whatever, you'll like the fact that this is really a sports movie and it's definitely, there's more racing in this film than there were in the other two Cars movies. But for me, I just found it kind of generic and predictable. I just never really completely emotionally engaged in the characters. And I feel bad for saying that because they're trying to do something very interesting here with Lightning McQueen and his mortality and all of that. But for whatever reason, it just didn't really click. And I hate to say that. Now, there are some good things in this movie. All the animation is beautiful. It's really interesting watching Pixar animate cars. Like, think about it. How do you make a car look sad or happy or angry or all of that? Now, in this case, they kind of anthropomorphize the cars. They have like eyes and mouths and all that. But the way they move around, the way they move their wheels as like hands, basically, all of that is pretty cool. They animate cars as like characters pretty well, and that's pretty awesome to see. Randy Newman's musical score is really pretty, as always, and there's nothing insultingly offensive or bad about this movie, but I was just honestly just sort of bored. I wanted more. The story is just kind of like other things and kind of predictable. But there was one thing about this movie that I thought was really cool and I thought was really special, and that is the inclusion in the story of Paul Newman's character from the first Cars movie. If you remember in the first Cars movie, there's that one, oh my gosh, I can't believe I don't remember his name right now. What's that character's name? But there's a car that was like the old man car who was like the authority figure in like Radiator Springs, and he was voiced by Paul Newman. Now, that was Paul Newman's last role. I think that was his last role, period, if memory serves me right. I think Road to Perdition was his last live action film, and Cars was his last movie, period. I'm pretty sure that is correct. And even as a little kid, watching Cars all those years ago, I loved Paul Newman's performance in that film. He offered a lot of gravitas and emotion to that first Cars movie. And because he passed away, unfortunately, he couldn't be in Cars 2. But in this film, they do something really interesting. The big theme of the story is Lightning McQueen looking back on that character that Paul Newman played. I can't believe I don't remember his name. I'm sorry, I'm really embarrassed about that. But, that car that he played. I mean, he remembers all the stories and stuff that they taught him. And one cool thing that Pixar did was that they took old voice recordings that Paul Newman recorded for the first movie, and they put them in Cars 3. So when Lightning McQueen has like flashbacks to the first movie or whatever, or like, flashbacks to training with, oh gosh, I wish I can remember his name. Doc is, I don't know. Anyway, Paul Newman's character, the car that he voices, he has like flashbacks in the movie, and they used old voice recordings that Paul Newman recorded to put in this movie. That was pretty cool. And I really liked that. I thought that was really neat. It was kind of cool to see Paul Newman, or to hear Paul Newman in this case, in a brand new movie in 2017. That was pretty cool. And again, to see Lightning McQueen remembering him and wishing he can learn from him in his life right now, that was kind of cool. It's kind of like a tribute to Paul Newman in general. And I'm such a huge fan of Paul Newman. He was such an iconic actor. That made me really happy. That was really cool. And by the way, this is just a random thing, but remember that car that Michael Keaton voiced in the first movie? I think the character's name was Chick Hicks or whatever. There's like a car in the first Cars movie, and he was like Lightning McQueen's rival. He's in this movie. They reprised that character, but Michael Keaton didn't come back to voice him. And I was really surprised. Like, I was like watching the movie like, that doesn't sound like Michael Keaton. He's actually voiced by Bob Peterson this time. If you don't recognize that name, you'll definitely recognize some of his earlier characters. He's one of the oldest filmmakers who have worked at Pixar. He was the original director for The Good Dinosaur. He's a screenwriter for a lot of their movies. But he actually does some voice work for Pixar as well. He was the voice of like Nemo's teacher, like the Stingray or whatever in Finding Nemo and Finding Dory. He was the voice of Roz, funnily enough, in Monsters, Inc. I'm pretty sure that was him. And yeah, he's a veteran filmmaker in Pixar, and this time he takes over the role of Chick Hicks in Cars 3, which is interesting. I can only imagine, like, Michael Keaton being on the phone with Pixar, just being like, guys, I was in Birdman and Spotlight and these big movies now. I'm too good for Cars now. I hope it wasn't like that. I'm sure Michael Keaton wasn't that mean on the phone, but it's just kind of interesting how his career has really took off and he hasn't reprised his role. I thought that was interesting. Anyway, I don't really know what else to say about this movie. It's fine. It's watchable. There's some good things in it. The third act is really sweet. For me, the third act was actually pretty emotionally touching. And I'm not going to spoil it, of course, but I was really pleased of what they did there. But at the same time, Most of the first act and the second act I just found kind of dull. So unfortunately, Cars 3 was just sort of okay in my mind. And I hate to say that. Again, it's fine. Some of the voice acting is really good. The animation is lovely. But in the end, as far as Pixar movies go, Cars 3 is not their best effort. So I want to give Cars 3 a C+. It's okay. It's fine. I was disappointed though. Having said that, next time Pixar releases a movie, you bet I'm still going to go see it right away. Because they are still the best storytellers in the world. One bad movie or a few bad movies with all the great movies that they've made so far, their track record is still pretty good in my book. So have you guys seen Cars 3? What did you think of it? Let me know down in the comments section below. And what is your favorite Pixar movie, period? I gotta go with the Toy Story movies. I mean, The Incredibles is pretty close. I love Finding Nemo. Monsters, Inc. is really good. Ratatouille is great as well. I might put that in there. WALL-E is really good. I love A Bug's Life. Oh my gosh. I can't even decide my favorite Pixar movie. I don't know how you guys are going to do that, but do your best and let me know down below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. You guys are the greatest, and never, ever, 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 ever forget, most important of all, I am your friend. I am always going to be there for you. You got a friend in me. Get it? Because I have a Toy Story shirt on. It's humor, guys. You guys are the best. I will see you next time.